Okay, good evening and welcome everybody. Go ahead and get started. My name is Amanda Kurtz. I'm the Deputy Town Clerk, and I have a few statements for the record before we get started. Tonight's regularly scheduled Herndon Town Council work session is a virtual meeting. Next week's meeting is a public hearing and individuals are encouraged to participate and provide comments for the record at town.clerk@herndon-va.gov. The work session this evening is conducted electronically pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2, 3708.2, A3 as amended, the order of the Governor EO-53 as amended, and in accordance with Ordinance 20-0-23, Continuity of Governmental Operations during Pandemic Disaster COVID-19, adopted March 24th, 2020 by the Herndon Town Council as amended. Proper notice of the electronic meeting was provided in accordance with Section 2.2, 3708.2 of the Code of Virginia, along with information for viewing the meeting and submitting comments for the record. The agenda and meeting materials are available on the town's website. Electronic meetings will begin with a roll call to determine a quorum. All votes, including adjournment, will be by roll call vote. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Amanda. I will go ahead and call the meeting to order, and I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Town Manager Bill Ashton.
Town Manager Ashton is present.
Town Attorney Lisa Yates.
Town Attorney Lisa Yates is present.
Vice Mayor Olam.
Vice Mayor Olam is present.
Councilmember Baker.
Councilmember Baker, present.
Councilmember Delagula. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Councilmember Delagula.
Present.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember DeCall.
Councilmember DeCall present.
Councilmember Friedrichs.
Councilmember Friedrichs present.
Councilmember McKenna.
Bill McKenna is present.
And Mayor Merkel.
Lisa Merkel is present. For the record, we have a quorum electronically. Bill Ashton, the town manager, and Lisa Yates, our town attorney, are also present. As stated by the clerk, tonight's meeting is conducted by electronic means pursuant to the appropriate laws. All members of council will observe meeting decorum by showing their hand to be recognized to the chair for comments. And we'll try to remember when you're recognized to speak, to state your name before providing comments. I'll begin by recognizing our town manager, Mr. Bill Ashton, to provide an update on the continuity of operations and matters related to the emergency. Mr. Ashton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I see I've had a PowerPoint put together. This is Bill Ashton, town manager. Just wanted to go through and give you a quick update, and I thought it'd be better to present it visually to you so you could follow along. First off, slide, please. Earlier this week, yesterday, as a matter of fact, Governor Northam had a briefing on his Forward Virginia initiative, which is his plan to open Virginia. Although it is a very broad-based plan at this juncture, additional information regarding individual businesses is forthcoming, but it's instructive because we've pivoted as a staff from how to close, how to preserve, how to save, how to keep people safe, to how do we reopen, what is the pacing of a reopening, what does reopening look like. And so I just wanted to bring you up to date because I'm going to start with Go Virginia because that is a very important topic with our thinking as we're moving forward. Slide, please. So just to give you an overview, if you have not seen the governor's briefing yesterday, I have the slides. I can share it with council. I'll be glad to do so. The first phase of Forward Virginia includes, rather than stay at home, it's safer at home. It's more, it's a little less restrictive, and it's still saying to the citizens of the Commonwealth that you're better off being in your house than out running around and being in public. It will ease social gatherings to no more than 10 people. It will still pushing for social distancing, teleworking, face coverings, but the key component for some of our businesses is there will be ease restrictions on certain businesses, and that I would yield and I would caution folks to look to the governor's webpage for additional guidance on this. And they're going to be bringing it out based on the sector, the business sector. They're going to give a little bit more intelligence on that. Slide, please. So in a workplace scenario, phase one, still they are pushing for physical distancing. The state is really pushing enhanced cleaning, disinfecting, really focusing on workplace safety, and their anticipated time frame of phase one would be 2 to 4 weeks. Based on the rest of the presentation I'm going to give you here in a few minutes, it's probably going to be closer to 4 weeks. And one of the reasons behind that is according to the public health officials, it takes at least 2 weeks before we see whether or not a certain phase has actually set us backwards in terms of the conditions on the ground and the metrics. So it will be at least 2 weeks. It'll probably be 3 for them to analyze the data. But all in all, I'm betting it's probably going to be at least 4 weeks in phase one. Slide, please. Once they move through that period, you're going to move to phase two. This is where stay at home for vulnerable populations is what the Commonwealth is going to push. They will ease social gatherings to 50 people. Social distancing, teleworking, face coverings, all are going to be operative during phase two, and there'll be further easing of business limitations during this. This also is a 2 to 4 week time frame. Very similar to phase one, they will need at least 2 weeks to 3 to analyze whether or not the next phase has caused a rebounding of the virus, which would slow things down or potentially turn things back. So once again, I'm probably suggesting it's going to be about 4 weeks in phase two at least. Slide, please. Moving into phase three, and they were very adamant about this, that the gateway to get to phase three is no evidence of a rebound in the other two phases for a sustained period of time. That's why I'm saying 4 weeks is probably the bare bones minimum to get through each of the previous two phases. This is still 10 to 12 weeks away. So we're talking August, mid-August, till we even can sniff at phase three, according to this timeline. This includes safer at home for vulnerable populations, remove the ban on social gatherings. It removes capacity limits on establishments and gatherings. They're still very much interested in us cleaning and disinfecting, and they are working on what other measures might have to be enacted to control the virus during phase three. So this is the overview of the governor's the governor's three-phase plan towards Forward Virginia. Slide, please. And to that end, the start point right now, Governor Northam has extended Executive Order 53, which was due to expire. Has been extended through May 14th, which means that phase one could begin as early as May 15th. Now, that being said, the regional leaders are unsure of what that's going to look like, both in terms of our businesses and our organizations together. We're working on seeking more clarification. We have additional briefings as the week moves on. As a matter of fact, the governor's chief of staff is virtually meeting with all the CAOs later this week to discuss this even more, to see what this would look like. Again, I have no more clarification. At this point, before I pivot to Herndon, I just want to encourage anybody listening that has a business in town, refer to the Commonwealth. They are the ones that are putting out the information about the businesses. That's the best source of information. The Department of Health is another very good source of information. I'm not substituting myself in any of that. I'm just trying to give you a brief update of what the governor's standpoint is of this moving forward, and so that it can help inform us as far as the reopening conversations we're starting to have on staff. Slide, please. So with reopening the Herndon government, we plan to follow a phased approach in Forward Virginia. I'm not going to get out in front of the governor. I don't think it's prudent or advisable to do so. So as we're looking at the phase one and phase two of the governor's plan, we still need to have a workplace where social distancing is a critical component to that. That means we're going to continue to telework. We're going to continue doing meetings via WebEx. We are going to be very restrictive on staff going into private residences, unless it's the case. In a state of emergency, we would go in, obviously, but electively staying out of the homes. We're going to be looking at that. Personal protection, we will be promoting the use of masks as we start to loosen up some of the restrictions on staff or on the public coming into the buildings. We already are using gloves to open mail, or if we handle checks or cash, we'll be doing that in a more widespread way. We're looking at this as a very phased reopening. It's not just going to be a flip a switch. We're going to get after it. It is something we're going to do in a very measured way. We're going to keep our current sick leave and symptomatic policies are going to remain in place. They've been very successful. Getting symptomatic people out of the environment quickly and putting them in a 14-day quarantine, I think, has saved the town staff to this point. I can say that with some surety that those policies really have worked. We're going to start bringing more people off admin leave, because as the facilities open, functions come back online, we're going to need those people back in their jobs. So you'll see that starting to lessen. Slide, please. We're right now looking at our facility considerations. Plexiglass protective shield sneeze guards for any place that is in contact with the public. We're going to have to mark and direct spacing and traffic flows of people. I'm sure everybody's been to Costco or to, they're the ones that have a very elaborate system, or to, I'm trying to think where I was recently that just had little dots on the floor. That we're going to have to do things like that to make sure we space public in our facilities. We're going to have to look at relocation of workspaces and equipment as well, partially because if you've ever been in the upper, anywhere in HMC for the most part, a lot of staff are sitting on top of each other. And if we're going to start bringing them back, we do want to make sure we're distancing them and protecting them as much as possible. We're going to have signage to still promote our virtual businesses. And we're going to have signage to instruct people on how to best interact with us. Again, additional sanitation stations, and then enhanced cleaning protocols for the building with a greater frequency and a greater depth than we would normally operate otherwise. There are all considerations we're currently working on. Slide, please. So as we're bringing facilities back online, there are two groups that I look at. Number one is the facilities and functions we currently are not doing at all. Community center would be one where we're not doing anything in there. So we have a certain set of metrics for those people. First of all would be compliance with Virginia Forward. We would have to examine facilities to make sure they're prepared to operate how they are planning to. And in these cases, we're also going to take this as an opportunity to do a management review of those functions, to take a look at those through policy lenses, risk lenses. Obviously, fiscal is going to be throughout. We're going to talk about that more later tonight. The financial considerations are at the fore of our mind in this, and we will be, as we bring these things back online, before they come back online, they're going to have to go through a series of review steps prior to them coming back online. It's a great opportunity, since they're currently not operative, for us to do this before we put them back into play. The second group is the functions that we've put into a virtual space right now. So we're doing a lot of things with electronic submissions, and we're dealing with people over the phone, and we're doing it in a very virtual way as opposed to what we used to do in a face-to-face. During phase one, I intend to keep that solely virtual. But as we start moving into phase two, I want to look at this and see if there's a place for virtual to still be there moving forward, a hybrid model of virtual for those comfortable in that space and in person for those that aren't. And so that we can serve the customer in the way they wish to be served, and as opposed to how we wish to serve them. So kind of turn that thought process on its ear and look at it from a perspective of a customer. If you want to be served virtually, we want to be prepared to do that. So even as we move into phase two and phase three, we're looking at a hybrid model for most of our virtual activities that we've been doing during the pandemic. Again, this is another opportunity for us to get better as a result of this situation. Slide, please. So this is right now just a draft, an order of reopening. It's not we're not trying to say this is a by importance or anything like that. This is just things where, like, we have some low-hanging fruit, like the golf course. We feel that we can get the golf course online back more quickly than other operations, because it's naturally distanced while you play. If we do things right with it, having like folks prepay for their tea time, so they're not interacting with staff on site. They come in, they show their pass, and they go out to the tea and go. If we restrict them to one per cart, if we increase cart cleaning protocols, we can easily fit them into a socially distanced operation to where we can then put them back online. Community center is another one that this is going to be something that's going to be phased. Again, because they're shut down now, we're going to do those managerial reviews of everything coming back online. And we're going to look at this as a way for us to slowly bring it back, but it's going to have to be consistent with Forward Virginia. The courts, we've already started talking to the courts. The courts want to get back online. The dockets are getting enormously long. They are chomping at the bit to get the satellite court system back in play. We met with the courts earlier this week to discuss what it would take to responsibly socially distance a docket and for them to start processing through that. So we look for that as one of the early functions we go back online. And parks is another one, very much like the golf course. It's a social distant place to go out there and interact with the parks. I see that as being earlier rather than later. As we move further into level 2, that's HMC first floor, bringing DPW operations, tier 2 services back online, maybe perhaps some tier 3s, adding some more parks and rec classes. All other departments that are still working on tier 1 activities, we start getting into tier 2 activities. And then as you see level 3, HMC second floor, police public areas, tier 3 activities, the remainder of the parks and rec classes we can potentially bring back online in a fiscally responsible way would also be included in phase 3. So these are, like I said, this is an early draft that these are the things we're thinking about and working on as we move forward. Next slide, please. And just before I close out on this, I just want to just reiterate to anybody listening, and as you all understand, this is not flipping a switch back on. We're in a different world than we started, I don't even know how many weeks ago, 10 weeks. How long has this been? It seems like 10 years. We're not going to be able to flip a switch. But that being said, we still want to bring it up in a measured, thoughtful way that is looking at these functions and having us examine these functions and improve these functions as we bring them back. So we're trying to find those opportunities where we have them so that at least if we have gone through this, we have something to show for this on the other side is kind of where my thought process is on reopening the town government. That's all I have right now, Madam Mayor. I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Are there questions of council? Vice Mayor Olem, is that your hand?
Yes.
Okay, and ask everyone to please state your name before you speak.
Sheila Olem. My question was on phase 2. What does DPW 2 and 3 mean?
We have one of the things we did in our business continuity planning exercise that as we saw this pandemic coming, we brought out a business continuity plan from years ago. We dusted it off, we updated it, and we prepared. And there are certain activities that they do that, if you look at phase 1 or tier 1, that would be things like trash collection, water and sewer, the core things that are key to public safety and public health. Okay, things on the second tier is instead of, I don't know if everybody watched, but today they were out mowing the town hall square. That would get mowed once a week normally. It was kind of scraggly. We would increase the frequencies of doing that. It would be bringing things online that we kind of shelved while we were focusing on the pandemic and keeping the core functions in play. We'd be looking to expand those back out.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other questions? Signe.
So I really like the hybrid model that you discussed, which I think is good for people with disabilities and older people. You didn't mention anything about the moving waste, yard waste back into the schedule. Is that?
Yeah. That would be what I consider a tier 2 activity that we put back in. Yes.
Tier 2. Okay.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, once we start getting the workforce in place, we're going to be able to ease some of those things that we've already restricted.
And I guess that's all. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from council? Anybody? Cesar.
Hi, Councilmember Delagula. Bill, thanks for that info. That was good. Question on slide 11. You kind of mentioned the different potential operational openings of things. So I wrote this down, just not to pick on it, but just take the golf course, for example. Have we given any thought to the additional cost, or I should say the difference in operational costs today versus when we budgeted these items? Is it going to cost us less or more to operate in this new environment? And again, just not picking on the golf course, but just because it was at the top of the list there.
Right. The golf course is one where since it's an enterprise fund, it has to break even or do better. And so Gene is looking at this through a business lens. And one of the things he is looking is what is it going to take to realign his organization to get the revenues to offset his expenses. Very similarly down here, if you look back maybe a slide or two earlier where I discussed the bringing functions back online and the management review. The management review that we're looking at, it starts out with Ford Virginia compliance. Then it moves to immediately budgetary analysis. We go straight to budgetary analysis in number 2. And then as we move deeper into this, it goes through risk, goes through legal, goes through personnel analysis before we approve it to come back online. But budget is right after Ford Virginia. We looked at the budget impacts of bringing that online is number 1. And you'll see as we talk later about the budget, you'll understand why that's at the fore of our mind.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Anybody? Okay, thank you, Mr. Town Manager. We do have one public hearing, or several public hearings, but the first one is an ordinance to amend Chapter 63, Solid Waste, to increase the recyclables fee per quarter. And I will recognize Tammy Chastain, who is our Deputy Director of Public Works, for the staff report. And she should be popping up here in just a sec. There she is. Hi,
Hello.
Tammy.
How are you?
Good.
So this is Tammy Chastain. So this is simply, as you stated, a change to our recycling fee. This was last changed in 2018 when we went from $4 per quarter to $8 per quarter. This is a request to change it from $8 per quarter to $16 per quarter, or effectively $64 per year. Similar to 2018, we're still seeing changes in the recycling industry. We're not getting those rebates that we got before. Our latest ones are less than $2,000 rebate on a $10,000 bill, essentially. So this is essentially a request to increase that cost to pay for those services. So about all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Tammy. Are there questions of council for Tammy on this item? Signe.
Now can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Signe
Yeah,
Friedrichs.
okay. This is Signe Friedrichs. Tammy, how close are we to recovering all the cost of recycling?
This one brings us much closer. I would say from my report, it's about 80% or so of offsetting those costs is what we're looking at with this increase.
Right. Is there and we're planning to eventually completely recover the cost? Are we going to go up to the level where we're at 100% ideally?
I would say ideally for me, yes. I don't know that's the final verdict. I'll leave that up to someone higher than me.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other questions of staff? Sheila.
Yes, Sheila Olam. So Tammy, just
Yes.
you're restate that all this is doing is raising the rate to capture the cost that it costs the town. We're not making money on this.
No, we're not. This is, to offset the rising costs in our recycling.
In fact, we can't get as much money as we used to when we, okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Cesar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Cesar Delagua. So to dovetail on Vice Mayor Olam's question, we're not making money, but are we covering the actual cost? I know you said that 80%, but we're not covering the actual cost to the town, correct?
Not the total cost, no. Yeah, this, we've slowly increased this as the recycling commodity prices have dropped, essentially.
And maybe it's not a question you can answer tonight, but assuming we increase a little bit over the next year or two, at what point do we completely cover the cost? I mean, I know things will fluctuate, but if we had to put a stake in the ground today, what do those increases look like over the next quarter, year, 2 or 3 until we meet that line?
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you. I know in 2018 when we were running the numbers, it was about $20 a quarter. But with the new rates that we've had for the past couple months, I can run those again just to confirm.
Yeah, and just sorry.
Mr.
No,
Town Manager?
I was going to chime in during the budget process. I did have DPW brief me on that. I do have I could send something out to you all this week. I have something sitting on my conference table.
Yeah, it would help. It would help me visually if we could represent the different scenarios.
Yep.
Because first of all, we're going to have to talk to people about the rate increase and also prepare them for potentially more of a rate increase if we want to cover these gaps. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Anyone? So Tammy, my only question is, you mentioned the commodity pricing is going down. So we, until very recently, were getting a lot more rebates from various places or the county or wherever they come from. So this is sort of a newer problem that the gap is widening instead of narrowing.
Yeah, it is. It's widening, and with the pandemic, it's getting even worse. So I'm not even sure what it would look like after this is over either.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Also, a lot more recycling going on at homes and none at the commercial properties. So or almost none. The county is struggling with that as well.
Our recycling has actually gone up a little bit.
I bet.
With more people at home. So.
Any other questions or comments before we move on? Okay, thank you so much, Tammy. The next 3 items relate to the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget. For information, the town manager developed the proposed budget prior to COVID-19, and it was provided to the town council and to the public by April 1st per state law. Over the past month, as you guys all know, staff has worked to update the proposed budget to accommodate the new fiscal realities that have been imposed on all of us by COVID-19. And for this reason, the town council and manager delayed the budget proceedings until May, with the first work session being this evening. The clerk and the council have received comments and they have been entered into the record. I'll outline the budget process. So bear with me for just a couple minutes. And this is mainly for the public who is watching at home.
Madam Mayor, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sure.
I am just supposed to say for the record that all comments received were provided to the council and have been entered into the record.
Okay, I thought I said that, but that's okay. Now it's officially official. No problem. Okay, so the public hearings on the proposed budget are May 12th and May 26th, with work sessions this evening and on May 19th. The council will hold separate public hearings next week on the tax levy, followed by a motion to continue the public hearing until May 26th. Concurrent public hearings will be held on the fiscal planning resolution and the appropriation ordinance. followed by separate motions to continue the public hearings to May 26th. I'm going to ask the clerk to enter into the record all signed transactional disclosure declarations that she has received pursuant to sections 2.2 3112B 23 and 2.2 3115G of the Code of Virginia. Amanda, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mayor Mochler and Councilmember DeCall each provided signed statements for the record that throughout the year, they may be invited as a guest to attend events hosted by various organizations, some of which may receive funds or services from the town. The statements indicate that they are able to participate in the budget deliberations regarding nonprofit organizations fairly, objectively, and in the public interest, and that the appropriate disclosures have been filed with the town clerk and town attorney. And Vice Mayor Olem and Council Members Baker, Delagula, Friedrichs, and McKenna each provided signed statements for the record that they are unpaid volunteers for various organizations in the community, some of which may receive funds or services from the town. Throughout the year, they may be invited to attend events hosted by these organizations as guests. The statements indicate that they are able to participate in the budget deliberations regarding nonprofit organizations fairly, objectively, and in the public interest, and that the appropriate disclosures have been filed with the town clerk and the town attorney.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. So the fiscal 2021 budget presentation, I'll go ahead and recognize Bill Ashton, our town manager, for the presentation, which will include items 4 through 6 on the agendas before you, the tax levy ordinance, fiscal planning resolution, and the appropriation ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Bill Ashton, town manager. And if you could possibly bring up Jenny Tripoli and Karen Gagliano, if you haven't already, I would appreciate that. Thank you. Slide, please. Well, just as a way of background that you all are very aware of, that others that may be watching may not be aware of, that this all started with town council giving guidance to the staff with priorities back in January. 3 major categories of priorities were given to us. It was the activities that will advance the 2035 vision, demonstrating a commitment to town employees, and continuing efforts to promote the town's strong fiscal position. So at that point, staff had already been deeply involved in developing the budget for next year. And we had started meeting with you all individually. We were getting your take on it. As a matter of fact, we held a work session on it at the beginning of March to discuss where the budget was going. And we had the numbers finalized at that point, and we sent them off to print. And on April 1st, pursuant to code, I was able to deliver a budget for FY 2021. That included your priorities, that included consultation with you and your input, and we were ready to go to bat with that, but unfortunately COVID-19 happened to us. On March 11th, that's when we first started to turn a corner and really reorganize the organization under the COVID emergency. But what does COVID do to us from a budgetary perspective? Well, first and foremost, it ushers in an economic model that we have no idea what it's going to look like once this abates. The effects on our revenues are unknown. Duration of shutdown, also unknown. As I talked earlier, we're talking about phase 1 perhaps next week. Hopeful it starts next week. Hopeful it stays to the governor's schedule and we don't rebound and go backwards, but we don't know. And we don't know that what happens once we get through that, what's going to happen to the economy. I mean, initially, there's a lot of talk about this is a V. We're going to go down, we're going to hit bottom, we're going to just come bouncing back up. Then there were folks talking about W's, where we go down and up and down and up until we climb out of this. Anymore, some people talking about an L, where we would hit bottom and stay bottom for a long period of time. There's other experts that talk about a square root, where it's going to come down, bounce up, and it's going to level off before it then goes up again. We don't know. There's a lot of experts weighing in on this, and we don't know. But as you know, one of the critical components to doing a budget is doing revenue forecasting, which is based on economic models within a certain area of margin of error. Slide, please. What we do know is that we have seen in FY 2020 some declines. Meals tax from February to March, now bearing in mind March is only reported a half a month, is 29.5%, give or take. Transient occupancy taxes are down 34.4%. Sales tax is down 22%, but the problem is with that, that's a 2-month behind. We don't even know what sales tax numbers look like in a COVID world right now. And partially because the Commonwealth delayed the remitting of sales taxes at the outset of the crisis, so we're even 1 month further behind on that. What we were able to do is BPOL had reported, and we had a very strong year in business professional occupational licensing that came in well above budget. So that has helped to offset some of this, but it's still, we are going to see, and we're going to talk about here in a minute, a marked decline in our budgeted numbers for FY20. Also, Parks and Rec fees. We had to close Parks and Recreation. So Parks and Recreation fees are down 50%. So at this juncture, as we talked about last week, as we're looking at the current state of our expenditures, which we've clamped down on, and our revenues, which some have evaporated, we're probably going to reach the end of the year needing about $420,000 as of tonight out of revenue stabilization. That's a $1.8 million fund that we have for this purpose. We're probably going to need about 23.3% of that to balance the budget for this year. That said, this is a fluid number. As you've seen, this number's bounced around a little bit. We analyze it all the time where we are. This is something that we spend, Jenny spends it. I think that's Jenny's whole stock and trade these days, is tracking. Again, right now, as of this period, we're looking at about $420,000 out of revenue stabilization. Slide, please. Here's a table that you've seen a lot of. And might I just pause? All these tables are in the report I sent to you all on Friday, and they're all available on Granicus as of this afternoon. So anything that's in this slide presentation is directly out of the report I sent to you all on Friday. So, but anyway, as we continue, the FY 2020 revised projections, general fund revenues, this just gives you a picture of where our revenues are sitting, where we're projecting them to be at the end of the year. I draw your attention to the bottom, the $34.8 million revised budget projection, considering we started the year at 37.2. That was where we were projecting to be. That's where the budget was. And so we dropped off about $2.5 million or so, down 6%, as you see in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. Again, the drivers being other local taxes under budget. You're seeing charges for service under budget. So these are things where we took a pretty significant hit as part of the COVID lockdowns. Slide, please. We knew this was going to happen. We've talked about this a lot. This next slide is more for folks that might be listening at home. We knew this on March 11th, that we saw where this was going, and we immediately locked down on hiring. We immediately locked down on overtime. We froze travel and training. We capped other operations and maintenance expenditures. We suspended the use of P cards, and we put, or when we didn't, we put limitations that are in like a sub 200 limitation on P cards, so that it forced all purchasing to go through the purchasing official, so that we could see what was happening, and we could decline it if we thought it was not particularly trying to meet core missions at the time. We also stopped spending money on capital projects that were not grant funded. So we started locking down on expenditures in anticipation of revenues plummeting. And this was done at the outset of the crisis. Slide, please. So as you look at expenditures through the rest of FY 2020, we're again down about 6.4%. It equals, that we need to balance this. It's balanced $3.8 million. But you're seeing operations and maintenance taking a pretty significant hit of 12% to make that happen moving forward. Slide, please. So that's where we look like, well, that's where it's going to look like as we're ending up at the end of the fiscal year. So what are our challenges in crafting a new budget? Well, the first and foremost, I said at the outset, is limited data. We only have 1 month's worth of meals taxes. so far, and it's really truly a half a month that has been reported. Transient occupancy taxes is in the same boat, about a half a month. Sales taxes 2-month delay. So we don't even know what taxes we're getting a flavor of it, but we don't have enough data to truly do a valid projection moving forward. As we said earlier, the unpredictable environment, the pace of reopening, the length of pace of recovery. Is this thing going to come back and rebound at some point and set us back economically? We don't know. Plus, another topic that we've talked about quite a bit recently is the potential secondary revenue effects. If our businesses and our hotels aren't making money, then they're not going to be able. Their B polls are going to be less than last year. It just stands to reason. Not to mention the other businesses, small businesses that are taking a hit, and what's going to happen to their B poll. There are studies out there now that I've alluded to where commercial real estate is poised to take a hit. In my memo or in the plan that you received on Friday, we talked about mortgages and forbearance. That is a critical bellwether for residential real estate, and that's something we're keeping a very close eye on moving forward. So these are things that are still sitting in the offing that's creating some unique challenges in a very, very confusing environment as we're looking at crafting a new budget. Slide, please. So with that, we were looking for a pathway forward where we could be flexible and adaptable. First, at the top of our list, fiscally protecting the town is obviously our mandate. We wanted to try to meet your budget guidance in some way, shape, manner, or form as we move forward, but we also wanted to insulate ourselves from an overreaction based on limited information. If we were to go to bat with the numbers we're looking at now for next year, it would have decimated this organization to balance that budget. So we didn't want to take decisive actions at this point that would be very difficult to unwind. We wanted to be able to do it in a more measured way. So how to do that? We needed to avoid the large spending amounts early in the fiscal year while we gathered more data, while we bought more time, while we did additional analysis on the data we received, and we adapted our expenditure patterns to that. Slide, please. So the budget plan that we laid out in which you received on Friday was a 3-step plan. Step 1 being the baseline. It's the proposed budget you received on April 1. A lot of work went into it, and it included all your budget guidance. So all your input that you all were giving me, I didn't want to just throw out and just try to reinvent this from scratch. So let's leave that in play. But let's take a look at, go back 1 slide, please. So we wanted to then avoid the decisive actions before warranted, avoid large spending. So what we did is propose an amendment to that budget on Friday. So the base budget, we've changed a couple things, and then we went on to talk about a strict spending plan in what we call the bridge document moving forward that gives us the flexibility and adaptability, protects the town, and buys us the time we need to do this in a much more smart way. Slide, please. So step 1, you know about that budget received. That's April 1. Step 2, so what I submitted to you on Friday was the version 2 of the proposed budget. It removed the 1-cent increase to the real estate tax rate. It removed $100,000 out of B poll. Now, some might say that's not enough, but historically under budget B poll to help pay for capital. Well, we're going to sequester capital here in phase 3, so we have some room in the budget to take a hit on B poll. We removed anything that was pay related for the employees. The market rate adjustment that we talked about, the pay for performance that we talked about were removed. It was critical to get those out of there because, like in the case of the market rate adjustment, it would have kicked in July 1 and we would be committed to it. The whole goal here is not to become committed to anything on July 1. We're going to talk about that in a second or two. We're going to remove $56,000 from the contingency line item. What does that do? We're in a contingency mode now. Adding contingency when we're in a contingency mode didn't seem to be consistent. So we removed that line item as well. And so version 2 resets the base budget. Flip the slide, please. Down about $565,000 to $38.8 million. FY 2021 proposed budget version 2 includes this look at things with those couple little minor adjustments. It has everything that you all were talking about in your priorities. It has everything we talked about in the individual budget meetings, we talked about in the work session at the beginning of March, but we've tweaked it a little bit. Slide, please. And on the expenditure side, again, the 508 is the removing of the raises, and the 56,000 is predominantly the removal of the contingency. Slide, please. The problem is the revenue assumptions in that document are off. And again, limited data, unpredictable environment, the potential secondary effects we talked about before are all still operative. If we had to go to bat today to come up with revenue assumptions, it would not look good. Slide, please. They would look more like this. So what you would see is a significant decrease of about 31% in other local taxes. You would see a significant decrease in charges for service and some of these other areas. Slide, please. We're going to drill down on a couple of those revenue categories right here, as you'll see some of the assumptions. Go one more slide, please, because we're going to pull the biggies out. We're looking at about a 50% hit in meals tax if we had to go to bat today. That would include about a 75% reduction for 2 quarters and about a 25% reduction for the following 2 quarters, assuming the economy starts recovering. Transient occupancy. Hotels are decimated. The occupancy rate is way up. We would look at 90% reduction for a couple quarters. I mean, that based on data we're getting now, that's what it looks like moving forward. The limited data we have now, that's what it looks like. So you see the rationale behind that 75% reduction per quarter, and then getting them about halfway back to where they were in the final 2 quarters. Another one is Parks and Rec fees. We're going to take a pretty massive hit in Parks and Rec fees because, again, as we get into July, we're just starting to spin up the community center. We're just starting to spin up all of their classes and their programs. They're going to take a hit during this process. We're going to have to hold the festival in a sequester category. We're going to talk about it in a second because of the expense of the festival moving forward, especially given the other shoes that may drop in the second half of the fiscal year. So if we had to go to bat with a budget that reflected these data based on limited information that we have today, this would be an entirely different budget than what we're seeing today. That said, there's part of us that believes it's not going to get this bad. It could get worse, but it could be better than this. So how do we maneuver our way through, slide please, in a way to where we can honor the fact that it could end up there, while at the same time not decimating everything that you're trying to get done. And that's where the strict spending plan comes in, the bridge document. So what we're going to ask you all to do is adopt the version 2 document and then immediately adopt a document that sequesters money to where in the sequestration list we're going to talk about in a second is focusing out of the gate July 1 on our O&M and capital on COVID-19, public safety, the public health things we talked about earlier tonight, transportation, solid waste management, the things we're kind of doing right now. And we're going to sequester $5.5 million of O&M and capital. And then we're going to establish revenue benchmarks moving forward. Those revenue benchmarks, as we're going to discuss later, are going to be the trigger to release items from sequester if we're doing better, or conversely, looking at other options if we start sliding worse. This resets us back to a place where we can be flexible in a very cautious way. Slide, please. So if you look at what we're going to be asking to be sequestered, it's about $5.5 million in these categories. We're going to get into more detail in a second. It's about $750,000 in personnel. It's about $2.5 million in O&M. It's about $1 million in capital and $1 million in interfund transfers, which is another capital category, to end up at a $5.5 million sequester. Slide, please. As we dig more deeply in, the personnel that we're talking about is temporary, seasonal, and part-time flexible workers that are focused on areas where we can't recoup the cost of their employment. We're looking at things like the Herndon Festival, sequestering that while we figure out what's going on. A lot of these things are we're delaying equipment replacement for vehicles. We're delaying equipment replacement for police cars. We're delaying some technology projects, some other projects that we had talked about during the budget process will be put in this sequester category and held. We will talk with you. We'll help to prioritize these things. And then as we hit the revenue benchmarks, if we start exceeding them, if things are a little bit better than we're anticipating with the limited data we have today, we can let that go. We can let an item or a partial item go and move forward with some of these things that are in the current budget today. Slide, please. This plan relies us to put a great deal of weight on strong fiscal management and using it to create flexibility. The benchmarks we're talking about go two ways. They're going to be, we're going to look at those benchmarks. If in a measured, disciplined, and prioritized way, if we're above, we will release items from sequester. If we're below, then we need to talk personnel. That is the only other place where we have not gone to look at options for inclusion here. I made this comment to a couple management team members earlier today, and I'll make it publicly. This spending plan is the Alamo. And if we get to a point where it isn't enough, we're going to be in the position to have a plan to start closing those shortfalls, and it's going to be out of the personnel category. So it is really incumbent upon us to make sure that we manage this properly, that any sequestered item comes out with revenue support. Or else, if we don't do that, we will have to go look at personnel. This is very important. Another key element to the spending plan is you will be briefed. You will be briefed throughout. This will be a regular topic of conversation at work sessions in the next fiscal year, talking about where we are in relation to our revenue benchmarks. Slide, please. This is unusual. This is an unusual process. I don't know of any time the town has ever done something quite like this, but it's unusual times. It's an uncertain place to be, to do this three-step process. But I think it's critical to position us with flexibility, to allow us to adapt to an environment that has more unknowns than knowns by far. I believe this step plan is a way forward that buys us time to get more data, to get a better situational awareness and an understanding of what we're confronting and where we're going with this. And allows us to tailor our responses to the changing environment in a very measured way. So with that, Madam Mayor, I will take any questions and then Jenny and Karen are on too. They'll probably do most of the answering because they're a little smarter than me.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Town Manager. So open up to questions and comments, discussion from the council, and just raise your hand and state your name when I call on you, please. Who wants to start us off? Signe.
Thank you. This is Signe Friedrichs. I want to thank you, Bill, for making something this complicated at least a little more understandable to the average person.
I would like to take credit. I would like to take credit for that, but Jenny Tripoli had to dumb it down for me.
Thank you, Jenny Tripoli. A couple questions. Just on slide 4. Miscellaneous was down like 1,100%. What is miscellaneous?
So that it's actually up. And miscellaneous is basically not otherwise classified. So it's one-off revenue that doesn't belong in any other category. It looks tremendously large, but the estimate increased from 4,000 to about 50,000 for FY20, just because that's really what's in that account, or was a couple days ago. It could even be a little bit more. So that's why that looks like, oh wow, look at this 1100% increase. It's just in some random one-off.
And for the record, that was Jenny Tripoli speaking.
Sorry.
It's okay.
And Bill, you said we had half a month's worth of revenue, or not Bill, Jenny, a half a month's worth of revenues for I guess sales tax and meals tax. Is that right?
So this is Jenny again. So what we mean by half a month is half of March was in normal world and half of March was in COVID-19 world. So we only have a half month's worth of data on the negative impacts to the restaurants and the hotels. And so that's what we mean by that, because, you know, March 1st through about the 15th things were just cranking as normal. So April's filings, which will be due in May, that'll be our first full month of COVID-related data for meals and transient occupancy. Sales tax is always 2 months lagged. So what we received in April was from February. February is almost always the lowest month of the year. You know, pretty much everybody's credit card bills are due from Christmas or what have you. And so so it's a lower benchmark, but we won't see March's sales tax, I don't think. And we were supposed to see them in May. I don't know if the delay means that we won't see them until June. So we don't really even know the impact of COVID-19 on our sales taxes yet.
So we're not going to have any idea in time for finally approving this budget. We're just going to have to go on extremely unverifiable assumptions. Okay.
Yeah.
And to that point, that was one of the reasons why we were trying to get an approach that buys us time before we had to take harder decisions, to put us in position to where we're not overly committed. So while we're doing that, we're getting the data. We're starting to see the post-COVID world. We're starting to see part of a recovery world and what that would look like, so that we can make better calls moving forward, because we knew we wouldn't have the data at all by the time this would go to adoption.
Okay. And
that was Bill Ashton, town manager, by the way.
Thank you.
All right. I think you answered all my questions. So I had more, but I think you answered them along the way. So thank you. Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, thank you. This is Lisa Merkel, and my question to you, Bill, is the sequestered items that we have listed as sequestered are still priorities that we want to take care of and that the council would like to do. And so we aren't saying they're not funded. It's just right now they are on hold until we have, like Signe just said, the additional data and we know what kind of revenues we have coming in. Is that how we're looking at that? Yes,
this is Bill Ashton, town manager again. Yes, Madam Mayor. What it is you all are saying, yes, we're appropriating the money, but we're not giving you permission to spend it. It's there, but you can't. I have to come. We have to have the revenue conditions right before we can spend it. And it's like it's akin to paying for things in cash, rather than sitting out there and us starting out the year with a credit card, just running it up, knowing we're going to get the revenue on the back end. It's saying no, as the cash materializes, if we're hitting the benchmarks, we're meeting our core requirements, we can now start releasing these items that are important to you. Thank you. Sorry, I jumped ahead. I don't usually do that. What other questions or comments do we have for any of the budget team? Pradeep.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question. So these meals taxes, the loss in revenue or the decline in revenue that we are projecting 1.75 million and transient and occupancy taxes, which is 1.72 million, and sales is 293K. All those are the projection decrement for the entire fiscal year, correct?
Yes, they are, Pradeep. What you're seeing there is, if we took the data we have today, what we're hearing is happening around, it's not so much the data we're receiving, but we're reading things like the Ron Carly piece I sent you all a few weeks ago. And we're using that to kind of inform some numbers here to give an idea of, if we had to go to bat with very poor data, we would have to do it with this. And so, yes, that's what the projection is based on the data as of right now, which is still very fluid.
Got it. And the reason I asked this question is I wanted to verify, and I just wanted to applaud Jenny, Bill, because this is really a great budget, if you ask me, because we are in completely unpredictable time. We don't know what will be our revenues, and especially with this revenues decline, I added, and it comes around $5.5 million. And then the sequestration amount that we will be administering, but we will be putting as a budget, but we will not be spending, also comes 5.5 million. So that balances. And at the same time, with the removal of 1% real estate taxes, which is around 465,000, and then BPOL, which is 100,000, is again balanced by that personnel of $508,000. And at this time, since we do not know how the data comes out, we do not know what will be our revenues. And I think this is a great way to go, because even if we have money, we are really in a spending cut, or we are really spending money in a very economic way, I would say. And if the situation later, then we always other priorities coming in. So I just wanted to applaud Jenny, Bill, and all the staff who worked tirelessly in this budget process. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. Absolutely. And in a month of crazy uncertainty. So, Mr. Town Manager, did you want to comment?
Yes, Madam Mayor, Bill Ashton, Town Manager. And I also want to say Karen Gagliano, who's on here too, is the budget manager. We put her in some unique situations with needs for data and to redo some thinking, and she stepped up to the plate as well. I didn't want her lost in the mix as well.
Karen, you must be thrilled you took this job. Other questions or comments on the budget presentation this evening? Anybody? Sheila.
Thank you. And thank you, Town Manager, for an excellent report, putting together what all the staff said. If I might, I'd like to look at some of the things that we got in the comments from citizens.
Sure.
And I know, Mr. Town Manager, I've asked this before in meetings, but just in case you're watching, there's concern that we're going to keep working on things like the bus bays and some other major projects going on town. Can you just explain why we're doing that, since you've already explained it numerous times, and throwing out the baby with the bathwater if we don't go ahead? But can you touch on that, please?
Certainly can, Madam Vice Mayor. Thank you very much. This is Bill Ashton, Town Manager again. The reason why we're still moving ahead with things like bus bays and Van Buren Street is because these are grants that we are holding right now from other governments. They are federally funded through the Transportation Department, or they're funded through the Virginia Department of Transportation. It's their money that has already been allocated for those activities. There is a little bit of town taxpayer money involved, but it is minor. It's on the fringes. And also, too, the one thing about this is we're looking at this budget. This is a cash flow centric sort of exercise. From a capital perspective, we're still in very good capital shape. I mean, so our ability to do certain things is a little less limited. Again, as we talked about earlier, I talked about the revenue stabilization fund of 1.8 million that we're going to tap for 460. That is one reserve account out of like 4, 5 that we're talking about. And I can have Jenny delve more deeply into what our capital situation is very strong and continues to be very strong. That said, you can't buy groceries on a credit card. You can't buy groceries out of your savings account. So what we're talking about here is operating this government next year within the means that we're going to earn next year. And that's the topic of tonight. But as far as bus bays, Van Buren, even the environmental remediation on the Stolman lot is a state brownfields grant involved with that. So there's grants from other governments that are involved in those activities. And we feel that this is a great time to step up and go after those things because we could probably get bargains in a lot of ways moving forward. So with things slowing down, other contractors might be more willing to do it at a better price. So if it's other people's money, I've actually tasked staff with getting more aggressive on those things so that we can get better deals. Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor.
And I've got two others.
Sure.
I'll let you take one at a time so I forget what I asked. Another individual was asking about the water and sewer improvements that we've had over the years. And most of us know that Herndon's been around for a while, and I know when they were doing the work on Spring Street, that was to replace things that had been there for over 50 years. And so those things have to be done. And they were concerned, why didn't our rates go down because we did improvements? And because you say this a lot more succinctly, I'm going to let you explain. Because
Certainly. This has to do with the other report I sent you all this past week, where we talked about operational expenses and operational revenues. The rates and what we get in are meant to cover operational expenses, which are things like us buying the water wholesale from Fairfax Water. It includes things like buying the sewage treatment from Fairfax County. And those prices continually go up. As a matter of fact, Fairfax Water, Fairfax County, the rates that they provide their own customers are less than the rates we provide ours. But there's a problem, is we've had over time a problem covering our operational expenses with our operational revenues without tapping into things like that we would need for capital, things like interest on what is in the bank, because we have to keep a certain amount of money in the bank for the fund. And we've had to tap other sources of income to the fund that would go to helping to pay for the capital. So the reason why rate increases are necessary is to keep up with the expenses it costs to provide the service. We are still the lowest in the region. Even with the increases we've had recently, we're still the lowest in the region, but we're still trying to close the gap of covering that delta between operational expenses and operational revenues, which I think is a critical thing, much like the budget we're talking about here. We want to be able to pay for it each year with the money we make that year. And that is where we're trying to, that's what we're trying to achieve.
thank you. You say it so much better than I do. So thank you. Wanted to make sure that got put out to the community, especially those. The other is something that we already have going, but someone was concerned about parking issues in the future, and couldn't we hire someone that was going to pay for themselves? You know the answer to that. I know the answer to that, but you say it so well.
Well, thank you again. This is Bill Ashton, Town Manager, once again. If you're referring to parking enforcement, we do have a parking enforcement officer. He is currently not aggressively out there during this COVID time because we don't have a whole lot of cars parked places that are much less cars parked illegally. Chuck has done a remarkable job since his hire, and he has covered his costs with what he does. So again, he's done a magnificent job. He's the first park enforcement officer we've had, and he set the bar pretty high. When he does choose to retire, it's going to be hard to find a very good replacement for him.
Thank you. And then I just have two comments. We did have at least one person say since Fairfax is going down, we should go ahead and increase our taxes on real estate, which we're not going to do. But someone did make that statement. And then there was one or two that said they don't know why they pay taxes. And unfortunately, I think people are going to find out why. We do a great job with what we do. I know we work on a very lean budget, and thank you for helping us through this crisis, but for all of our managers for keeping us very lean and making Herndon be that destination place. Thank you. I appreciate your work.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor. Other comments or questions this evening? Anybody? Cesar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Councilmember Delagula. Bill and Ginny and Aaron, thank you for that information. I know it's not the best time to present. Slide 16, in terms of the revenue assumptions, just kind of wanted to touch on this a little bit. If you listen to most of the financial experts, they're anticipating the boomerang, right? So it's going to get a little bit better, but then it's going to get worse again. In these assumptions, again, I know we're swagging here, but what sort of revenue or economic lines are we using? Are they fairly flat? Are they continually going down? Because for me, meals tax, I mean, 50% of restaurants going out of business is probably not unlikely.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll lose not just the revenue, but the entire restaurant community will be impacted. Same thing with the transit occupancy tax. It's not just the revenue, it's the actual establishment that will go away. And I guess I'm asking is how bleak did you take into consideration when you put these assumptions together?
I'm going to turn this over to my closet pessimist, Jenny. You care to take a crack at this?
Sure. This is Jenny Tripoli, the Director of Finance. Again, with next to no information, I tried to be pretty bleak, but without it being zero. And so, the thought was we knew that a lot of the restaurants and the hotels in particular, the business dried up overnight. And we don't know what the recovery is going to look like. And so that's why, the cuts are the assumptions are very severe, especially for the first couple of quarters. Now, I don't know which quarters. I tried to take into consideration just that during the summer, maybe as the heat and the humidity allegedly tamp the virus down and things come back online with Forward Virginia, that we would see a bit of a bounce back, but then come the fall and winter months, which are slower for your hotels anyway, to see a reduction again. So we really tried to take that into consideration, knowing that, like you said, it is a swag, but to give ourselves maximum flexibility to respond to the economics as they present themselves, versus trying to say, well, this is really the line in the sand now, because that line in the sand could get washed away, in another couple of days.
Right.
So let me ask it then this way. So the assumptions, did you assume, and let's just take meals tax, was the assumption that half those restaurants would be gone and then we would have 50%, or was it 50% of where we are today with everyone being intact? Because those are different outcomes, right?
Agreed. My assumption was 50% of where we are with people intact, knowing obviously that not everybody will make it through this, but I wouldn't begin to try to guess to say that 50% will fail and go away permanently.
So I'll send you some research. I mean, there are analysts out there predicting a severe boomerang.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be this sort of nice rosy recovery.
No.
Remember when the housing market blew up, right? That was a 10, 15-year recovery. I'm not suggesting this is the same thing. My concern is we didn't go too far down the black hole to represent what could potentially be a worst case scenario. And I think that's my concern with these numbers. Are they really, worst case? Because worst case to me is you've got half the revenue base that is no longer there.
Yeah, they're not worst case.
If I can just jump in for a second, this is Bill Ashton, Town Manager again. They're not worst case. And that's one of the reasons why I'm emphasizing to you all, and I've emphasized to the management team, that the benchmarks we're going to establish to release sequestered items work two ways. And if we're failing to reach them, if we're getting worse than we believe, then we will have a plan in place to readjust and take harder decisions at that point. We're trying, because it is so murky, for lack of a better term, right now. We're just trying to buy us flexibility to manage the murkiness. And so, to your point, Cesar, I agree. This could get real ugly real fast. But the good news about the sequester is it resets what we're spending down. We're not overly decisively committed in areas like increased pay or things like that. And at that point, we can then pivot and then start making some personnel reductions in that category to start helping us get to where we need to be to make that balance. But instead of making those decisions with very murky numbers now, we're trying to delay that out with the benchmarking process.
I appreciate that. My view on these numbers is the 5 million sequestered is good, but it's not going to be enough to give us that flexibility, right? Where we're going to have to do those cuts. The other thing I just want to clarify, the water and sewer costs. We talked about the difference, the delta between the operational and the revenue coming in. I understood, or I have in my notes here, that those diverged back in 2008. Did I write that down correctly, or did I miss?
We've had, and this is Bill Ashton again. I'll let Jenny put a finer point on this in a second. It was 2006 were the earliest audited numbers we had, and they weren't touching each other then.
Okay,
so this is a longer term problem.
So that's my bigger point here. Yeah. We have another gap in the budget that we have to close going forward. We've got certainly, the recycling delta. We have the water and sewer. At what point are we aligning that revenue with the cost? And how are we doing that? And when does that convert back? Because if we're going to keep operating in a negative, right, these numbers look even worse. So that's why I keep going. What do our future outcome assumptions look like? When do we close the gap on those budget holes?
Jenny, you want to take a stab at this first?
Sure. This is Jenny Tripoli, Director of Finance. So the Water and Sewer Fund is a different fund. As you know, it's an enterprise fund. And so the 5 million that we're talking about here is just the general fund. But yes, you're right. We are trying to close the gap. The initial model that we had done back in 2017 suggested a measured approach to the rate increases to try to close those gaps, but it's a rolling 5-year model that we need to do. As the commodity costs increased, those rate increases weren't high enough for water and sewer to catch up, because up until 2017, we hadn't touched the rates since 2011, I think it was, but the costs kept going up during that time period anyway. So we had the model refreshed, but it came back with some kind of unexpected results, and it hadn't been stress tested by the financial advisors yet. And then that's when COVID-19 world hit. So we tabled that. But the initial proposed increase of 5% for water and 10% for sewer, which we took off the plate for July 1st with the intention to revisit it a little bit later, was to try to close a little more of that gap a little sooner, to address this issue. And with regard to the data going back to 2006, that was just in the expediency of time, because that's the oldest CAFR I had that was electronically available. I actually have boxes of CAFRs that go back to the 70s. But that was probably going to be overkill. And so that's I don't know the year when those two items diverged. At some point, I'm curious myself to find out when, but moving forward, obviously, is what we can control. And so we do want to get back together with our consultants and get this figured out to get you a plan.
I totally appreciate that. My last comment will be, if we're not closing the gap enough, we're never catching up. right? It's just diminishing returns in the smallest sense, right? It doesn't matter what we do, we'll never get there. So I'm not suggesting anything drastic, but I do want to make it, a priority that we've got to close these gaps. And I know Corona's a completely different animal, the budgets, but we should be thinking about that in context with how we're managing the budget going forward.
This is Bill Ashton once again. I agree wholeheartedly. And when I took this job and I saw that water and sewer number where it was, that's why we set out to do a financial plan. That's why we set out to start institutionalizing some of these rate increases so that we could close that gap and then index it in a way to where we don't get that problem. We don't get that problem again. At the same time, we, as you well know, we have a lot of capital investment in the future somewhere. COVID might have put us a little bit behind schedule on that, but we still have capital investments to make in the future, and we want to make sure we have a model that will serve us well in that time, and a model that's serving us well in capturing our operational expenses with operational revenues now, or as soon as humanly possible. So I couldn't agree with you more wholeheartedly.
No, I appreciate that. And again, just final feedback. I get we're in survival mode, right? And everyone understands that. I want us to really step back and be dispassionate on some of these assumptions. And although they may not be comfortable or palatable, we have to really plan for the worst case scenarios here. And the boomerang, I think, folks that I talk to, folks that I think know what's happening, that's got to be the expectation. We can't assume that everyone in business today or within facilities that produce revenue for us would be there. I don't see it happening.
And to that point, I spent my Sunday wrestling with the dispassionate elements of where we will need to go next.
Okay.
And so that is certainly on our minds. I'm hopeful that we don't have to go there, but we've started putting together a framework of how to incrementalize that. That's going to be our next steps moving into managing this budget next year.
So Karen, Jenny, and Bill, thank you so much for indulging me. Madam Mayor, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McKenna.
Yeah, I want to thank staff very much for everything. Considering where we are with the gap versus what the economy was doing, I think shows that you mitigated risk. One could say it was almost a Sortino ratio relative to the market. So nice job on that. The question I have in regards to modeling, are you using for my edification, I guess, are you using Monte Carlo simulations? And are the models extrapolated over a period of time? So let's say, obviously, you had a 15-day review in March, based on COVID. As this thing starts to play out, obviously, you're going to have more data to collect. Will you be able to model and actually have real dollars in regards to that?
This is Jenny Tripoli. That's the plan, is to get a bit more sophisticated with this as we get better data and it's less of a swag. I didn't run any, specific Monte Carlo scenarios just because it is so unique, and there's only also so many hours in a day. But to your point, there's some more formalized ways that we can look at this as we get more data. What I've been doing, because we're small enough, is as we got some of the individual businesses' information in, I looked, business by business to see kind of what they were reporting and what their trends were with the restaurants, with the hotels. So, this is still a little less sophisticated, a little more of a swag, if you will. But as we get more data, want to put more sophistication around it.
Okay. And, the other thing too, again, is just to show the uncertainty and for people in the audience, the first quarter of the stock market, the S&P and your general indices were down the lowest since 1938. It was the worst quarter since 1938. And April was actually the best April ever. in the market. So again, they predict obviously 7 of the last 8 recessions, as they say. So it's not a pure indicator, but I think as things start to adjust and we start to figure that out, I think it'll be easier for you guys to do that. And finally, economics is in fact the dismal science. So hang in there, and we love you for it. So keep doing what you're doing, and we're here to help if you need us. That's all.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak who hasn't spoken already? I think maybe only Jen hasn't spoken. And
Yeah,
you don't have to. I just don't want to leave you out.
No, I will just chime in to say, like, lots of great questions and discussions have already been asked and addressed. So I don't have any additional questions. Just I would reiterate the thanks. I think I know this is could be a really even a more dismal situation than it is, but I feel even from our last conversation that we had about this, that that there does feel like we have a workaround, we have a way forward, and through shared sacrifice. But it's I'm certainly comfortable, and I again really appreciate, just as everyone else has said, all the work that you've put in to get us to this point.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from council or from any staff members, if there's anything you wanted to add? Anybody? Okay, so just a reminder, next week we will have concurrent staff reports on most of these budget items, but we will take separate action to continue, and we will definitely be continuing it to May 26th because we have advertised 2 public hearings on the budget. So with that, we will move on to roundtable. I'll call on you guys for comments. A reminder, comments are limited to the continuity of operations or matters related to the emergency. And do you guys want to volunteer? Do you want me to call on you in order? Did I see you on my screen? Why don't I do that so I don't get confused? Cesar, do you have anything for us?
No, Madam Mayor, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bill McKenna.
Bill McKenna has nothing to report.
Okay, thank you. Jen.
No comments, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Pradeep.
No comments, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Wow. Signe.
Madam Mayor, thank you.
And Vice Mayor Olem, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Don't forget your mask. This one I received in the mail. It's absolutely adorable, and it's 2-sided. And your gloves, and be safe.
Thank you. I concur with Sheila. This is a tough time, and we've all got to do what we can. And it's been about 8 weeks, I think, Mr. Town Manager. Hard to believe.
It seems like 8 years, Madam Mayor.
Do you have any other comments for us, Mr. Town Manager?
I think I've bored you fine people enough tonight, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
No, thank you. We appreciate all the hard work, as we said. So that concludes our agenda this evening. Is there a motion to adjourn, Madam Vice Mayor?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I see no other business. I move we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion to adjourn made by the Vice Mayor and seconded by Council Member DeCall. And I will call the question and ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Olem,
Yes, Vice Mayor Olem.
Councilmember Baker,
Yep, Jen Baker, yes.
Councilmember Delagula,
Councilmember Delagula, yes.
Councilmember DeCall,
Yes.
Councilmember Friedrichs,
Councilmember Friedrichs, yes.
Councilmember McKenna,
Bill McKenna, yes.
and Mayor Merkel.
Lisa Merkel, yes. And that concludes our evening, and we stand adjourned at 8:28 p.m. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.